think there are a number of options, and from our point of view as an advisory firm, we always want to know the capacity of the company in terms of the resources to be able to sustain that option. One of your options is, in fact, e-commerce through JD.com, or depending on what you're selling, there are specialist sites for industrial manufacturing. There's Alibaba's Taobao if you're consumer product oriented. So there are a number of options, and I think that you have to spend some time thinking about how you can sell certain types of products on the internet, or setting up your own e-commerce platform. Even in Canada with Chinese language, more and more people have credit cards, and DHL and then FedEx do a good job. So it depends on what you're selling and who you're selling to. A web presence, even in your homepage in Canada, with a couple of pages in Chinese so people understand who you are, and spending some time on social media, and obviously getting some ads into Baidu or Google that promote your product, can be quite valuable even if you're not selling on the internet, because you're building some sort of awareness and brand within your core competency of your client base or the sector that you're focusing on. So I traditionally, people haven't looked at the internet as something that's viable, but the customs process is relatively porous, and the foreign exchange process is liberalizing, as we all know. So the ability for consumers and companies to pay for something using the internet, if you're not inventorying even in China where they can pay in renminbi, is still a positive area of focus for certain types of companies, especially people that are more focused on the consumer side or a very specialized small component. Second option, obviously, is to find a partner, whether it's a distribution partner, a systems integrator, a manufacturing partner, whether it be foreign and Chinese, who's using your component, who takes on the primary responsibility of integrating it so that you can develop a certain presence in the market while you look at your long-term strategy and your vested strategy. So finding those partners, including distributors. I would caution, though, that the one problem with a distribution partner generally is that they are usually responsive to a market. They're not into the expensive part of business, which is the marketing and brand development and sales process. They're very competent at servicing. So you may have to support that process with your own resources on top of it. We have one client who is in the medical space, and they have a very good distributor who has relationships with all the hospitals. The client is vesting in staff with our support in building the awareness and understanding of their product. It's a US-based company, and they're also responding in a way to opportunities in the market that we've identified, and they're going on a strategic plan because their long-term interest is brand development, so that those two processes can be bifurcated, with you, the exporter, taking on the branding process and the distributor taking on the fulfillment and payment process. So I think there are a lot of options in that area. And as I said, there are also foreign companies, people like Jepson's, Jardines, again, depending on the size and type of your product, that do this well, and who might be worth talking to because they know the space and they may or may not be interested in taking on your product. And there are trading companies, state-owned and private companies, that do brand development and marketing and sales and distribution. So I think that there's a number of options. In certain cases, we advise companies to basically define the value of your product from a technology transfer point of view, and say, we're going to enter into a license agreement with a key condition being that the product can't be sold outside of China without someone's permission, and selling that technology to a manufacturer or a partner in China who will take on the process and then pay you either a lump sum up front or a lump sum with an additional royalty payment depending on the length of the agreement and sales, with the IPR and the trademark still being retained by the Canadian exporter. The advantage of that approach is that it allows you to get presence in the China market, get the revenue out of the China market, but allow you to use that capital or that success to go and either fight for a larger market share in the United States or in South America, or because each product has a potential focus depending on what it is in terms of other markets that might be more important. And the same would apply. I think a lot of people fly to China. They should be looking at other options. There are partners in Hong Kong, there are partners in Taiwan, there are partners in South Korea, and there are partners in Japan who have big presences in this market, either as manufacturing companies or distribution companies. We recently started a project, and we had recognized that probably the easiest sell was to Taiwan, because it's going to be a long, protracted process for a Canadian client. And so we engaged the Taiwanese company, and because of the language and because of the business culture being more curious than the current SOE environment in China, state-owned enterprise, we were able to get into the chairman very quickly through an email and set up the meetings with the right people, and where it's an ongoing process. So I think you have to look at getting into China through different bridges or different channels as another option. There are even people obviously a lot of Chinese in Canada now who might have a complementary business in China. They could be selling widgets to banks, but they don't have a blue widget, and you're the specialist in blue widgets. They have a distribution force, a sales and marketing force to banks, but they don't have your product. They might be, because they're looking to expand their business and they don't have to go through the R&D process, being able to graft on to their existing customer base something that you have that they don't have. And the value to them is that it's a tested product, it's a viable product that's working. The value to you is that they have a ready-made sales force to take on your product, and it's just a question of coming up with the right structure. You could invest in their company, they could invest in your company, or you just have some sort of value-added marketing relationship where they're taking your product and providing the markup they need and paying you what you need to deliver it to China. So there are options even within Canada. The way you structure that we can get into in the third part of this video, in terms of the equity and other options. And then there's, of course, the option of doing it yourself, which for the right SME is the best way to go if you have the right product and you have the resources to fund it, because you can set up either a rep office or more likely a wholly owned foreign enterprise or a service organization. You can either do the importing yourself or use a trading company or logistics company to do the importing. Then you're in a relationship that's direct with your customers, where your salespeople are talking to your customers, you're selling the product, you're supporting the product. And that's ultimately potentially the most interesting for the right company, but it may not be viable financially for other companies. So I think those are your potential options in getting into China. You may go through a staged combination of some of these options. You may have different strategies for different parts of China. You may want to, depending again on who you are and what you're doing, you may want to set up and give yourself the key markets of North China, have a distribution partner who's Chinese for the middle of China, Shanghai, Jiangxi, Zhejiang, and have a different strategy for the South China that's relying on a Hong Kong partner. I think you have to recognize that something that's this big requires multiple contact points with the market and customer points. So I don't think you necessarily want to be trapped by just one approach to China. But again, I think we don't like to say there's any given rule for all companies. We like to look at each company, each sector, each product, and the capacity and where that company is, even in its own development and timeline in its offshore markets. And I think, to be realistic, and it may be counterintuitive for somebody who makes their business in China, you have to ask yourself a question whether China is the best market for you to go to at this point in time, and whether you're better off, as we just advised a client, to look at Australia, because Australia in their sector has a huge amount of influence in the mining technology space, that if they can point to a customer outside of Canada, it reconfirms to the Chinese mining community that their technology is accepted, not just because it happens to be used in Canada, but also because of time zones and different information flows. You can attack China by getting success around China, and that could include putting a consumer product into Singapore or Hong Kong before you bring it here. So I think you have to look at it with a fairly creative matrix. One of my favorite quotes recently is from a South African naturalist, Lawrence Anthony, who passed away. He said, "I don't even understand why people begin thinking in a box." And I think that's the approach you have to take to China, is that you have to look at who you are, what you want to do, and what your product is, and then be creative, but also be viable and be realistic.